Let us now talk about the term translocation. Now, what do you understand by translocation if you don't have any idea? That there would be movement, okay? Certain amount of movement that would be taking place. Now, this translocation basically deals with long distance movement within the plant. Now, long distance movement, as we have the topic which deals with the transport of solutes, we are dealing with long distance movement of the solutes, or you can say sap, within the phloem over here. Okay. Now, as you can recall, phloem is the tissue which is responsible for carrying the food material within the plant. You see, there are two parts of the plant, or you can say the two elements which are responsible for the translocation of solutes over a long distance. That is the trachea elements and the sieve tubes. Okay, so we are going to basically deal with these two parts of the plant, or these two parts of the plant tissue which would be responsible for translocation of solutes, where we would see a long distance movement of the food material, or you can say the sap that is being formed from the region of supply, that is known as source, to a region of utilization, that is known as sink. Okay, so for your understanding, we are dealing with the photosynthetes over here. Now, what is a photosynthete? We had talked about that photosynthesis takes place in the leaves. How it takes place, we have discussed in detail. Now, what we are going to see is that the source, which happens to be the leaf, it produces a lot more amount of sugar, and that is translocated in the form of sucrose to the other parts of the plant. Now, the surplus amount of glucose, or the surplus amount of food that is being formed inside the leaf, has to be transported over long distances to other parts where the food cannot be synthesized. Supposedly, we take into account the source as the leaf, and the sink happens to be the root. So, you know the root cannot form the food. So, the food which is being formed at the source will be transported to root, which would be the area where the food that is being formed will be utilized, and hence it is called sink. Okay, there could be another source, there could be another area of utilization. The sink could be using it at that very moment, as in the matter of root, or it could be storing the food material. So there could be storage organ as well. Okay. So the source could provide the food material, it could translocate the food material that is being formed to the storage organ, or the sink which is directly going to utilize whatever is being translocated. Now, you see that the phloem part is mostly involved in this process of translocation. You must have seen in the cases of certain plants, as in the case of deciduous plants, they get rid of their leaves, then later on they are going to take up the food material that is stored somewhere in the plant, and then they are going to give rise to new parts, or the new leaves that are going to be formed. You must have seen in the case of certain roots and stems, they store the food material, then whenever the circumstances, or you can say favorable conditions, they come back, that stored food is being utilized by other parts. So at times this storage organ could act as the source, and the source leaf itself could act as the sink. So you can see that there is a cycle sort of thing that is going on, that at one stage which part of the plant is acting as a source, it could act as a sink as well. So this leaf that acts as source happens to be a sink when we take into consideration the storage organ that has the food material. So it would act as source, and this would act as sink. So this is reciprocal to what we have seen earlier, where the source was the site of production and the sink was the site of utilization. It could reciprocate, it could be linked, and it could be interpolated. okay, inverted in a sense, and the roles could be reversed, rather I would say. So this is what is the translocation of solutes all about. Now when we talk about translocation in phloem, we have to see that this long distance movement, it takes place in two ways primarily, though there are four ways in which we have observed till now. Not we, the scientists have observed that there are four ways in which the movement of the solutes takes place, but we are going to deal with two of them. One is downward movement. Primarily it is downward movement, where we had seen right now that the leaves, being the aerial part, were acting as the source and sink was the roots where they were underground. So we have downward movement. At times the storage organ could be located below and the leaves would act as the sink, so that would be upward movement. In certain cases there is sideways movement, and in certain cases there is bidirectional. Okay, in both the ways. So we have primarily two movements. We are going to deal with this mostly, where the phloem from the leaves would act as the source. The leaves would act as the source. Phloem would be the main translocation channel, and the other part of the leaf, it could be stem, it could be root, pardon me, not the other part of the leaf, other part of the plant, that could be root, that could be stem, would act as the sink. And in the case when the storage organ lies below, then there would be upward movement, and at times we do find bidirectional movement as well. It has been observed by certain scientists. So we are going to deal with downward movement and upward movement in the case of translocation of solutes. Now, as I told you, this is the primary one. So we have certain evidences in favor of this downward movement, where it has been proposed very easily using experiments that it is the phloem which is responsible for conduction of the solutes downwards in the plant. Now how it was conducted, this downward movement as proposed was proven experimentally by the ringing or girdling experiment. Now I am pretty sure that you must have read and heard about it in your lower classes, where we have a plant, a stem is taken, and the stem is made a cut in such a way that the external part, that is the phloem, is being cut out. Stem is cut to the region so that phloem is got rid of. This is supposedly a potted plant you are having. Alright, this is the part that cuts out the phloem. You have formed a ring around it. Now what will happen after certain time, the food material or the food reserves, whatever is being carried down by phloem, are going to accumulate in the upper part that is being formed like this. This is a stem. The stem was cut. Now because there is downward flow and because we have cut the phloem, the whatever material is being coming is coming down, that stays over here, it accumulates over here, and with time you are going to observe gradually that it could form adventitious roots as well over here. Later on, this lower part, it deteriorates because it is devoid of whatever food material is being formed in the leaves. So this in a way demonstrates, this girdling experiment or the ring experiment demonstrates that it is the phloem which is responsible for downward movement of the solutes within the plant. Now how it was established? Certainly we did cut that part of the stem which was including the phloem, not the rest part. Xylem was present. Over here we are having xylems. The phloem part has been cut out. So because the phloem has been cut out, there is no contact between the upper region and the lower region, because of which whatever is being brought down by the phloem, that is getting accumulated on the sides of the upper region of the stem, and this clearly demonstrates that phloem is the one responsible for carrying down the solutes. So we have a downward movement or downward translocation of solutes, which is experimentally proven by this particular experiment. Further, there were many hypotheses which were proposed, which showed that how this phloem along with the tracheary tubes of the xylem is responsible for the downward movement, or rather I would say the movement of solutes from the source to the sink. For that, you need to watch the next lesson where we are going to study the Munch flow hypothesis. This is a hypothesis that will be proposed by a certain scientist long back in 1930s. It was proposed. So, for knowing the details, watch the next lesson.